Dad's having a heart attack. You need to come home now. Those 9 words shattered my Tuesday afternoon like a hammer through glass. My sister Sarah's voice broke on the other end of the line, choked with what sounded like tears. The quarterly sales presentation I'd spent weeks preparing for suddenly meant nothing. What hospital? I managed to ask, my fingers already fumbling to close my laptop. The conference room fell silent as 15 pairs of eyes watched me transform from confident marketing director to terrified daughter in the span of seconds. Just come home, Ellie. Please hurry, Sarah replied, a strange hesitation in her voice that my panic-stricken mind barely registered. Everyone's gathering at the house first. I muttered something about family emergency to my boss, who nodded understanding, and then I was running through the office, purse clutched to my chest, presentation notes fluttering to the floor behind me. The elevator seemed to take years to arrive, each second stretching like taffy as my mind raced through terrible scenarios. Dad was only 68. Too young. We still had so much unsaid between us. The drive to my car in the parking garage was a blur. As I fumbled with my keys, I called the hospital in my hometown of Millbrook, 2 states and 4 hours away. I'm calling about a patient who should have just been admitted. Robert James Taylor? Heart attack. One moment, please. The pause lasted forever. I'm sorry, we don't have anyone by that name currently registered. Are you sure? Maybe he's still in the emergency room? Robert Taylor, 68 years old. Ma'am, I've checked our entire system. No one by that name has been admitted today. A cold sensation washed over me. Maybe they'd taken him to County General instead? I tried there next with the same result. Nothing. By this time I was on the highway pushing my 10-year-old Honda well above the speed limit, hands trembling on the steering wheel. I tried calling Sarah back, then my brother Mike. Neither answered. I left increasingly frantic voicemails as mile markers whipped past. My mind ping-ponged between concern about Dad and confusion over the hospital situation. 3 hours into the drive my phone rang. It was my youngest brother, Danny. Where are you? He asked, his voice oddly flat. About an hour out. Danny, what hospital is Dad in? I've been calling everywhere. A pause that lasted a beat too long. Just come to the house first, okay? Everyone's waiting. But what about Dad? Is he stable? Did they do an angioplasty or? Ellie, just drive safe and get here. We'll explain everything. Something in his tone sent a chill through me. Danny had always been a terrible liar even as a kid. That time he broke Mom's crystal vase, his voice had that same unnatural quality. As fields and small towns flashed past my windows, memories of Dad flooded back unbidden, teaching me to ride a bike down our Maple Line Street. His proud face at my college graduation. The argument we'd had when I announced I was moving to Chicago instead of joining the family business. You'll come crawling back when that fancy marketing degree doesn't pan out, he'd said. 8 years later I'd proven him wrong, but our relationship had never quite recovered. I called the local urgent care center. Nothing. The regional medical center 40 minutes away. Nothing. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel as dread pooled in my stomach. The familiar landmarks of my hometown appeared. The faded welcome sign, Mrs. Peterson's garden shop, the high school football field where I'd once been homecoming queen. I hardly saw them. My mind was spinning scenarios, each worse than the last. Maybe Dad had died before reaching the hospital. Maybe they'd taken him to a specialized cardiac center somewhere else. I turned onto Sycamore Street, where the Taylor family had lived for 3 generations. The driveway was full. Sarah's minivan, Mike's pickup truck, Danny's Subaru, and several cars I didn't recognize. No ambulance. No medical personnel. Just cars parked as if for a family gathering. As I pulled up to the curb, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from my coworker Jen. How's your dad? Hospital allowing visitors. That's when I noticed my mother's garden club meeting in full swing across the street at the Peterson house. Mrs. Peterson waved cheerfully when she spotted me. Mom was there too, laughing with the other ladies, a glass of lemonade in her hand. Mom, who should have been at her husband's hospital bedside if he'd truly had a heart attack. I sat frozen in my car, staring at the family home with its neat white trim and my father's meticulously maintained lawn. Through the front window I could see movement. Silhouettes of people gathering in the living room. One of them, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with confidence, was unmistakably my father. My racing heart skipped a beat, then settled into a different rhythm. Not relief, but something harder and colder. I checked my appearance in the rearview mirror, wiped away the tear tracks and reapplied my lipstick with steady hands. Whatever was happening inside that house, it wasn't a medical emergency. I took 3 deep breaths, grabbed my purse and stepped out of the car. Whatever game my family was playing, I was about to change the rules. The front door opened before I could even knock. Sarah stood there, her mascara perfectly intact despite the tears I'd heard over the phone. Her eyes widened at my composed appearance. "Oh, thank goodness you're here," she said, pulling me into a hug that felt rehearsed. "We've been so worried." I allowed myself to be led inside, keeping my expression neutral. The living room was filled with familiar faces. Mike leaning against the fireplace, Danny fidgeting on the couch, Aunt Patty dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. And there, in Dad's favorite armchair, sat the supposed heart attack victim himself, looking remarkably healthy in his golf sweater. "Where's the ambulance, Sarah?" I asked quietly, shrugging off her arm. Which hospital couldn't find any record of Dad? A charged silence fell over the room. Dad cleared his throat but wouldn't meet my eyes. "Honey, we can explain," Mom began, materializing from the kitchen with a tray of coffee cups. She must have slipped in from her garden club meeting while I was walking up the driveway. "Your father had a little scare this morning, but—" "A scare that miraculously resolved itself before I drove 4 hours at 90 miles an hour?" I interrupted, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath. "Interesting that you had time to prepare coffee and cookies." Mike stepped forward, always the self-appointed family mediator. "Ellie, we needed you home quickly. We have something important to discuss." "Important enough to lie about Dad dying?" I moved to the center of the room, making eye contact with each family member. Danny looked away first, his discomfort obvious. "Nobody said I was dying," Dad finally spoke, his voice gruff but lacking its usual confidence. "Just that we had an urgent family matter. Sarah specifically said heart attack. I called 4 hospitals looking for you." I turned to my sister. "You were crying on the phone." Sarah at least had the decency to blush. "I was upset about the situation, that's all." "What situation?" I demanded. An uncomfortable silence fell. Aunt Patty suddenly became very interested in her coffee cup. Uncle Greg, who I hadn't even noticed sitting in the corner, glanced at his watch. The only person who looked genuinely distressed was Danny, who kept shooting apologetic glances my way. "Perhaps we should all sit down," suggested Mom, gesturing toward the dining room. "This is a family discussion that requires everyone's input." I remained standing while the others shuffled into the dining room. Through the doorway I could see the table was covered with documents. Legal papers with post-it notes marking signature lines, financial statements, and what looked like bank account information. "I'm not sitting anywhere until someone tells me what's going on," I said. Mike sighed dramatically. "It's Grandma Taylor's trust fund, Ellie. We need to discuss the inheritance." "Grandma died 3 years ago," I said slowly. "Her estate was settled." "Not all of it," Dad said, finally looking at me. "There's a separate trust that matures next month on your 35th birthday." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. Grandma Taylor had always had a soft spot for me, her only granddaughter. Before she passed, she'd mentioned setting something aside for my new beginnings. I'd assumed it was a small keepsake, not something that would warrant a family emergency. "So you faked a medical crisis to get me here to discuss money?" I asked, disbelief coloring my voice. "We've been trying to reach you for weeks," Mom said defensively. "You never return our calls." "Because the last 6 times you called it was to ask for a loan," I reminded her. "Which reminds me, how's that temporary kitchen renovation loan working out? The one from 2 years ago?" Mom had the grace to look embarrassed. Dad stood up abruptly and walked to the dining room, gesturing for everyone to follow. Like obedient sheep they did, all except Danny, who hung back. "I told them this was wrong," he whispered. "But you know how they get when Dad makes up his mind." I squeezed his arm gently. Danny had always been the honest one, too straightforward for the family's manipulative dynamics. In the dining room, Dad pointed to the head chair. "Sit down, Eleanor. We need your signature on these papers." The legal document in front of me had a title that made my stomach turn: Petition for Early Distribution of Trust Assets. Below it, in smaller print, "For family medical necessities." "What medical necessities?" I asked, flipping through the pages. "Your father might not have had a heart attack today," Aunt Patty chimed in, but his cholesterol is through the roof. The insurance won't cover the specialized treatment he needs. Dad nodded solemnly, one hand dramatically placed over his heart. The procedure could save my life, Ellie. But it's experimental. I looked around the table at my family's expectant faces, searching for any hint of genuine concern. All I saw was poorly disguised greed. "Where's Grandma's attorney?" I asked. "Shouldn't Mr. Hoffman be here for this?" "We didn't want to bother him with a simple family matter," Dad replied too quickly. "Just sign where the tabs are and we can all move forward together." Together, I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. Like one big happy family. I picked up the pen they'd conveniently placed beside the papers, turning it over in my fingers while they watched with hungry eyes. The pen felt heavier than it should as I rolled it between my fingers. My family's expectant faces reminded me of vultures circling, waiting for the perfect moment to swoop down. I set the pen aside and took a slow, deliberate sip of the coffee Mom had placed before me. "Before I sign anything," I said calmly, "I think we should talk about why Grandma set up this trust specifically for me." Dad's jaw tightened. "That's ancient history, Eleanor. What matters is the family's needs now." Ancient history. That's what he'd always called the summer after my high school graduation when I defied him by accepting a scholarship to Northwestern instead of attending the local community college like my brothers. "It's relevant history," I countered, leaning back in my chair. "Grandma set this up because she believed in my dreams when no one else in this room did." The memory of that June evening bloomed vivid in my mind. Dad's face turning that dangerous shade of purple as I showed him my acceptance letter. "Marketing? In Chicago?" he'd bellowed. "That scholarship won't cover everything. Who do you think will pay the difference? Your mother and I need you here helping with the family business." The family business was a struggling hardware store that Dad had inherited from his father. The same store that had swallowed my brother's ambitions one by one. "I've saved enough from my diner job," I told him. "And I'll work part-time in Chicago. You'll come crawling back when you run out of money," Dad had predicted, his words sharp as knives. "Don't expect a dime from us." He'd kept that promise. When my roommate bailed mid-semester, leaving me with double rent, my desperate call home was met with a lecture about consequences. That night, shivering in the underheated apartment, I'd worked out a budget that required 3 part-time jobs alongside a full course load. "Remember my first Christmas break?" I asked, looking directly at Mom. "When I couldn't afford a bus ticket home?" She had the decency to look away. It was Grandma who'd sent the ticket, along with a card that simply read, "Some journeys are worth taking alone." "I'm proud of you." "You chose to leave," Mike interjected. "We all stayed to help Dad when the big box store opened across town. We all sacrificed." "And how's that working out for everyone?" I asked quietly, looking around the table. Mike's faded work shirt had seen better days. Sarah's costume jewelry was a far cry from the real diamonds she'd once dreamed of. Danny's community college textbooks peeked out from his backpack in the corner. I'd sacrificed too, just differently. 4 years of ramen noodles and thrift store clothes. Falling asleep over textbooks after midnight shifts at the campus coffee shop. The summer internship I'd almost lost because my ancient laptop died, and I couldn't afford a new one until Grandma secretly sent a check for school supplies. When I graduated, I continued, and Dad said there was no room for marketing ideas at the hardware store. Grandma was the one who helped me network for my first job interview. "She always did spoil you," Aunt Patty muttered. "No, she invested in me," I corrected. "Just like she tried to invest in all of us. Remember when she offered to help with community college tuition for Danny? Or when she suggested the hardware store create an online presence?" Dad's face darkened. He'd rejected both offers as charity. My first year in Chicago had been brutal. A studio apartment with questionable heating and a starting salary that barely covered rent and student loan payments. No family support, just occasional calls from Grandma checking in. Each month was a tightrope walk over financial disaster. "When my first company downsized," I said, glancing at Sarah, "and I called crying because I didn't know how I'd make rent, who in this family offered to help?" Sarah studied her coffee cup intently. The answer was none of them. Instead, I'd picked up weekend catering gigs until I landed a new position. Each setback had forced me to become more resourceful, more determined. By my 30th birthday, I'd climbed to marketing director with a salary that finally allowed me to build savings. Last year I'd bought my first condo, small but mine. Each step had been earned through grit and countless nights wondering if Dad had been right all along. Eleanor always lands on her feet, Mom said, as if my success had been effortless luck rather than years of struggle. I landed on my feet because I had no other choice, I replied. No safety net. No family bailouts. Just my own hard work and Grandma's belief that I could make it. Danny nodded slightly, the only one who seemed to truly hear me. He'd been too young to remember the worst of the arguments, but he'd witnessed the cold shoulders and missed holiday invitations over the years. The irony, I said, picking up the legal document, is that now that I've finally built something for myself, suddenly I'm part of the family again. Not when I was struggling through school. Not when I lost my first job. Not when I was working 60-hour weeks to prove myself. Only now when Grandma's money is involved. The silence around the table was deafening. Uncle Greg checked his watch again. Dad's fingers drummed impatiently against the wooden table. So, I said, meeting each pair of eyes around the table, before we discuss this trust, I think we need to acknowledge why it exists in the first place. Dad slammed his palm against the table, making the coffee cups rattle. Enough of this trip down memory lane. We're not here to rehash ancient grievances. We need a decision today. I maintained my composure despite my racing heart. Years of high-pressure business meetings had taught me the power of appearing calm when you're anything but. You're right, I said, surprising everyone. Let's look at these papers. I pulled the stack toward me and began examining each page methodically. The legal jargon was dense, but after years of reviewing marketing contracts, I could spot the important clauses. Nobody spoke as I flipped through the documents, the only sound the occasional sip of coffee or Danny's nervous foot tapping beneath the table. On page 4 I found what I was looking for. The trust wasn't just for me. It was set up as an education and entrepreneurship fund for all of Grandma's grandchildren. My name was listed as primary trustee, not sole beneficiary. Interesting, I murmured. What? Sarah asked too quickly. I glanced up. Nothing important. Just reviewing the terms. I continued reading, making small notes in the margins with the pen they'd been so eager for me to use for signatures instead. Page 7 revealed another crucial detail. The trust didn't mature on my birthday next month as they'd claimed. It had matured on Grandma's passing 3 years ago. I'd been entitled to access these funds for years, but no one had bothered to inform me. I'd like to make some calls before signing, I said, pulling out my cell phone. Just to clarify a few points. Dad's hand shot out, covering mine. Who could you possibly need to call? We've explained everything. Mr. Hoffman, for one, I replied, gently but firmly removing my hand from under his. Since he was Grandma's attorney and the executor of her will. That won't be necessary, Mom interjected quickly. Mr. Hoffman retired last year. Another lie. I'd received a Christmas card from him just 3 months ago, mentioning his busy practice. Then perhaps his firm, I countered. Or maybe Grandma's bank. There are several points in these documents I'd like clarified by a neutral third party. The tension in the room thickened. Uncle Greg suddenly found an urgent need to step outside for some air. Aunt Patty began gathering empty coffee cups with shaking hands. The bank won't be open at this hour, Dad said dismissively. And we need these papers filed first thing Monday morning. For Dad's procedure, Sarah added, her voice overly dramatic. I nodded thoughtfully. I understand the urgency. Tell you what, I'll take these into the study to review properly. I wouldn't want to miss anything important. Before anyone could object, I gathered the entire stack and walked to Grandma's old study, now Dad's home office. I closed the door behind me, hearing the immediate outbreak of urgent whispers in the dining room. The study was exactly as I remembered, dark wood bookshelves, the faint smell of Dad's cigars and Grandma's antique desk that he'd never replaced. I sat down and pulled out my phone not to make calls, but to take photos of every page of the document. As I snapped pictures, I noticed a file cabinet drawer slightly ajar. Inside was a familiar manila folder labeled Taylor Trust Fund. I glanced at the door, then quickly pulled it out. Inside was a copy of the original trust document, not the modified version they presented me with today. The differences were glaring and damning. 5 minutes later, I returned to the dining room with a pleasant smile and the stack of papers. Everyone fell silent as I entered. "I've reviewed everything," I announced, sitting down at the table. "I just have a few questions before signing." "Of course, honey," Mom said, relief evident in her voice. I picked up the pen, hovering it over the signature line while my family leaned forward collectively, like plants stretching toward sunlight. "Just a small thing really," I said casually. "Dad, which hospital were you planning to have this experimental procedure done at?" He blinked, caught off guard. "St. Mary's, of course." "That's what I thought," I nodded, still holding the pen above the paper. "And this procedure, it must be quite specialized. What's the name of it again?" It's a new type of cardiac stenting," he stammered, looking to Mom for support. "Sounds serious," I said sympathetically. "And your cardiologist recommended this?" "Dr. Patterson," Mom supplied quickly. "He's very well respected." I nodded again, my pen still poised above the signature line. I could feel the collective held breath around the table. Danny was staring at me with wide eyes, seeming to sense what was coming. "Just one more question," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper that made everyone lean in closer. "Why does the real trust document I just found in the study specifically prohibit early withdrawal for anything except education or business startup costs?" The silence that fell was absolute. Even the ticking of Grandma's old mantel clock seemed to stop. 5 pairs of eyes widened in horror. "And while we're asking questions," I continued, setting down the pen with a decisive click against the mahogany table, "did you really think I wouldn't check if Dad was actually in the hospital?" The room froze like a tableau in a museum. Dad's face drained of color, then flushed crimson. Mom's hand flew to her pearl necklace, the one she fidgeted with whenever she was caught in a lie. Sarah stared at the table, unable to meet my eyes, while Mike's jaw clenched so tight I could almost hear his teeth grinding. "I don't understand what you're implying," Dad finally sputtered, but his voice lacked conviction. I calmly placed my phone on the table, screen up, displaying the original trust document alongside the photos I'd taken of their altered version. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. You forged documents, lied about a medical emergency, and attempted to defraud not just me but Grandma's entire estate." "That's a serious accusation," Uncle Greg said, suddenly finding his voice from the doorway where he'd been lingering. "It is," I agreed, standing up slowly. "Almost as serious as falsifying legal documents. I wonder what Mr. Hoffman would say about this creative editing." I tapped the screen where clear discrepancies showed between the documents. Dad pushed back from the table abruptly. "This is ridiculous. After everything we've done for you." "What exactly have you done for me, Dad?" I asked quietly. "Besides try to keep me small enough to fit into your vision of what a daughter should be?" The room fell silent again, the weight of decades of unspoken truths pressing down on all of us. In that moment I felt strangely calm, as if a fever had finally broken after years of simmering illness. "I'll be speaking with Mr. Hoffman on Monday," I said, gathering my belongings. "As trustee, I'll ensure the funds are used exactly as Grandma intended, for education and legitimate business investments for all her grandchildren." "You would sue your own family?" Mom gasped, clutching her pearls tighter. "I don't want to," I replied honestly. "What I want is for everyone to acknowledge what happened here today and for us to find a way forward that respects Grandma's wishes and each other's dignity." As I turned to leave, I noticed Danny had risen too, his face a mixture of shame and resolve. "I'm coming with you," he said, grabbing his backpack. Mike shot to his feet. "Sit down, Danny. Don't be dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic," Danny replied, a new steadiness in his voice. "I'm being honest, something this family should try sometime." Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn where I'd once played hopscotch and caught fireflies in summer twilight. Danny followed me to my car in silence, his shoulders hunched against some invisible weight. "I'm sorry," he finally said as we reached the curb. "I knew it was wrong, but I didn't stop them." I leaned against my car door, suddenly exhausted. "Why didn't you call me directly, warn me what they were planning?" He kicked at a pebble on the sidewalk. "I was afraid. Not just of them but of losing you completely. You've built this amazing life and I'm just stuck here. Failing community college and working at the hardware store. I studied my youngest brother. No longer the little boy who used to follow me around, but a young man struggling to find his path while trapped in the family quicksand. What would you do if you could do anything, Danny? If money wasn't an issue. His eyes lit up briefly before dimming again. Doesn't matter. It's just a pipe dream. Tell me anyway. I want to study environmental engineering, he admitted. Design sustainable water systems. But the program I want is in California and that's exactly what Grandma's trust is for, I finished for him. Education that builds a future. For the first time that day I saw genuine hope cross someone's face. The front door of the house opened and Dad stepped onto the porch, his expression thunderous. We need to talk about this, Eleanor, he called. You can't just walk away. Actually I can, I replied calmly. But I won't, not completely. I'll be back next weekend to meet with everyone individually about legitimate needs the trust could support. I opened my car door and looked at Danny. Need a ride somewhere? He glanced back at the house, then at me. Could I crash on your couch for a few days? Just until things cool down. I nodded and he tossed his backpack into the back seat before sliding into the passenger side. As we pulled away, I caught a glimpse of Sarah watching from the window, her expression unreadable. 3 months later, I sat in Mr. Hoffman's office signing the paperwork for Danny's tuition payment, the first legitimate disbursement from Grandma's trust. Mike had reluctantly approached me about funding for a small online branch of the hardware store, focusing on specialty tools that the big box stores didn't carry. It was actually a solid business plan. Sarah was still giving me the cold shoulder, but her daughter had started asking about college options, tentatively testing whether the rift could be bridged by the next generation. Mom called weekly now, our conversations awkward but increasingly genuine. Dad remained stubborn, but Mr. Hoffman had mentioned he'd inquired about the proper channels to request business innovation funding. The trust wasn't just about money, it was about the values Grandma had tried to instill in all of us. Independence, education, innovation, and perhaps most importantly, integrity. As I signed the final document authorizing Danny's tuition payment, I felt Grandma's presence strongly, as if she were sitting beside me, nodding approval. The inheritance she'd left wasn't just financial. It was the courage to stand up for what's right, even when facing the people who should have been supporting you all along. Your grandmother would be proud, Mr. Hoffman said as if reading my thoughts. Of both the trustee and the beneficiary. I smiled, watching Danny chatting animatedly with the receptionist about his upcoming move to California. Some inheritances, it turned out, were worth more than money. And some families could begin healing even after the deepest betrayals.